First of all, raise your hand if you've heard of MolochDAO. Awesome. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about summoning, sacrifice, and rebirth. So the summoning. Moloch was summoned on Valentine's Day at ETH Denver. It was a passion project. It's a side project from a bunch of friends and Ethereum community members that just wanted to build a DAO and try to help Ethereum fund the collective infrastructure. So that's at ETH Denver at like 1 a.m. The time is wrong because it's fast-forwarded when you look at it on Twitter in Germany. This is me on stage at ETH Denver voting in Cassandra. Cassandra was the first person summoned into the MolochDAO. She also used to run the Ethereum Community Fund. I sort of see Moloch as like the spiritual successor to the Ethereum Community Fund. Cassandra and I had a number of conversations about the governance issues with the ECF that ultimately led to its untimely demise. There were many organizations there was a board structure, all of the members from Kyber to Polkadot to Cosmos to Maker, many of them were arguing that they wanted some special privileges that would advantage them over new members and special governance rights. And that stuff, as well as just the fundamental incentive misalignment, led to its failure. And Moloch learned from those lessons. And so when I started summoning people into Moloch, one by one, each of these people put in some of their personal funds into the DAO. And it is through their sacrifice that we were able to create this grassroots effort and take the risk and create the conditions for Vitalik and Joe Lubin and others to join by demonstrating that we, as a community, could make useful grants. So you can see that the members here come from sort of all avenues of the Ethereum community. It's developers, it's executives, it's investors, it's marketers, summonons. And as a result of our hard work and our personal sacrifice, we were able to compel Joe and Vitalik and the EF and Consensus to all put in 1,000 Ether. And that brought us to 1.5 million Ether at the time. It's a little less now, but yep. I thought that was really cool because it provided validation for DAOs in general. It demonstrated that the EF was willing to decentralize its fund management and allow community members to participate. And it also showed a willingness to cooperate between the Ethereum Foundation and Consensus, which hadn't really been the case in the years before. So this talk will somewhat go over the operations of the DAO and how we've been able to use it, and it'll also go over the DApp decisions that we made in designing it and building it. And so the design decisions that we made were heavily influenced by the DAO, right? And so in the moratorium on the DAO, Eamon Gunseirer recommended that we, somebody who is trying to remedy the DAO design would add 2 features. 1, instant withdrawals, and 2, post-vote grace periods. And this rage quit functionality has now become its own meme, and to great success. And the idea is if you want to put in money into some sort of funding pool, the thing that you're most worried about is the other members of the funding pool using their voting power to bully you and use your money in a way that you don't want. And your ability to withdraw your funds at any time counteracts that. It's like a game theoretical I win button. And that made the pitch really easy. The pitch was, hey, I'd like you to join my funding pool. And they're like, okay, but how do I get out? And they're like, whenever you want. They're like, okay, I'm in. And that specifically was the reason that we couldn't use Aragon or DAOstack. And to Aragon's credit, they're now working on a project called Dandelion, which will bring the rage quit into Aragon DAOs, which I'm personally very excited about. I asked them for a long time to get it in the first place, but they didn't think it was important, and sometimes you just gotta prove things. Other safety-motivated design decisions was that the contract only uses a single ERC20 token that's defined at the contract launch. And in this case, we used WETH, and that allowed us to not have to have any loops to loop over ERC20 tokens that are in the guild bank or that are being input, or external contract calls. We actually remove the ability for the contract to have Ether, because if you want to send Ether, then sometimes you trigger a fallback function, which is an external contract call, and we didn't want to deal with any of that. We also decided to only build the MVP. There were a lot of times that we had conversations and somebody would say something like, you know, it'd be really cool if we could just blah, right? And I would agree, and you know, we'd think, yeah, that's a cool feature, and then we would just not do it. And the reason why is because the entire process of shipping a secure smart contract that you believe will or might hold a significant amount of money is bottlenecked by security. The cost of doing an audit, the cost of writing tests, this influences the entire process of developing. And so every additional feature that you add means more tests that somebody has to write and then somebody else has to review. It means a more complicated audit that makes it more expensive. And it also complicates the mental model, which makes the design less easy to convey and thus less socially scalable. And because this is, I have a full-time job, right? I'm the CEO of SpankChain. Everybody who is working on this has a job. We didn't set out to build a DAO company, right? We wanted a DAO to do what we wanted. And so it was very important that we were able to do this as a side project and save time. And so that also motivated the MVP. And the other thing is compounding, right? Being able to ship something. So meme-driven development is all about writing code in order to advance a narrative. It's to infiltrate minds, right? All of you know what Moloch is. If we added a bunch of features, maybe it would work better, but maybe it would have taken another 3 months to launch. And that would have delayed this narrative of what we've been able to accomplish, which is like making DAOs cool again, making this experiment, Metacartel was able to form around a clone of the MolochDAO, and all of that would have been delayed. And so I think we've done a good job at putting the meme first. So these are the active members in the share distribution of MolochDAO. You can see there's 2 little dots at the top. Those are our heroes, Vitalik and Joe. Jez San came in with 250 from Funfair, and Lodestar got about 130 shares as part of their grant. Not pictured here is the EF and Consensus, because their 1,000 shares were divided up between 10 individual members, and same with SpankChain, because we put in 500 ETH, that was also divided between 5 members. You can see a long tail. Some of that is grants, some of that is people just joining with lower amounts of ETH. This is the proposal submission graph. That's me in the middle. I'm the 512. I've submitted the vast majority of the proposals at great cost to myself. One of the features of MolochDAO is that there's a deposit, and you pay a processing fee out of that deposit. So you put in 10 ETH as the deposit, and you get 9.9 ETH back. And so I've submitted, I think, about 70 proposals. So just the proposal submission has cost me over $1,000. I think it's Cassandra that has the bot running that automatically pushes calls the process proposal button. So I hope at some point she buys me dinner or something. This might look to some as sort of centralized and risky. Really, I'm being the steward, right? People ask, like, hey, can you submit a proposal for da-da-da? And I'm like, yes, I will do it. And I'm just the most familiar with the interface. And a lot of times, it falls on somebody to just do the work. This is how people have voted on proposals. So you can see at the top, there are 4 proposals for YangDAO, and that was the most contentious of our proposals so far. The YangDAO is also a clone of Moloch, which is being used in the context of funding Andrew Yang's bid for candidacy, or for the presidential nomination, and it has a UI that uses meta transactions that we wanted to build on and fund through this structure, but many in the DAO felt that this was a potentially inappropriate use of funds. I took a different approach, and I thought that being able to demonstrate use cases in mainstream context could be really important, and on the off chance this becomes a sweeping success and ends up on CNN, it could be a powerful boost for Ethereum's narrative. And those 500 shares from SpankChain came in real handy because it was down about 200, and then I swung the vote. Yeah, so most, and you can see on the left, it's 0.3, so that means about 30% of the total participants in terms of shares voted on that proposal. So there's about, I think it was like 2,000-ish voting out of 7,000. On those, most proposal votes are quite low. I think I've passed some proposal votes with just my one single summoner share because there's no quorum. So what have we funded so far? We funded over $120,000 in grants. This is as of a week ago. We've to keep funding more. I think another 30,000 proposal just passed. Over 2/3 of it has gone towards ETH 2.0 and development. Some of it has funded various ecosystem projects, and some of it has gone to internal upkeep. So you can see that about 600 of the shares, there's more shares than there is Ether now, because every time we make a grant, we dilute ourselves of our pool of Ether and mint new shares against it and give those to the grant recipient. That's how we pay for things collectively. And so the fact that there's roughly 8% less ETH than there is shares means that the members have spent about 8% of the money that they have put in. If you tried to exit now, you would get 8% less Ether back than you started with. This is an incomplete list of the grants that we've made. I just ordered it by amount. So ChainSafe for ETH 2.0, Node Factory for an Ethereum validator client GUI. So that's what will measure your uptime of your staking node. It will record your performance in terms of how much money you're getting. It'll allow for key management, attaching to multiple different types of nodes, and email notifications, and so that just passed. $27,000 split between several proposals to Matt Slipper for ETH 2.0, the State of ETH 2.0 report that we did initially, several months of part-time networking, specs, coordination. He also wrote the libp2p report to try to rally the community around solving the outstanding issues with libp2p. $20,000 for a UI on top of the Hopper mixer built by Argent. 15 for Whiteblock. Well, Antoine, he's now with Whiteblock. He wasn't at the time. To build a test runner to keep nodes in sync. This is the 3.5 for the Yang DAO. And Kevin Iwaki proposed to do Ethereum career fairs to represent the jobs that the Ethereum community might have open at career fairs. And this was an interesting proposal because it wasn't something that anybody had thought of at the outset of Moloch. We weren't like, we should fund marketing and outreach. But it points to one of the interesting properties of a DAO, which is that you might have, a scope, a mission, values, whatever, but if people vote to pass something, then that is the new, scope. So the scope is whatever the members say it is, and that's the only real rules there are. And I think MolochDAO has been a great success so far. It started out as an experiment, and we ran it, and 6 months in, we've made grants. And one of the most important things, I think, that we've been able to accomplish is nailing down this process, where we are able to have fast turnarounds for grants. And so Danny Ryan, who largely interfaces between the ETH 2.0 research and developer teams, you could think of him as the leader of ETH 2.0, he posted a poll in our members-only Discord for trying to see what the members thought about building this ETH 2.0 validator client. And 5 weeks later, it was last night, that proposal passed. And that's really important because it means that we have a very efficient grants process. We go from idea to RFP, he does the poll, we say, yeah, this is a good idea, write up a proposal, 2 pages, 1 page, whatever, we'll blast it out, and we collect candidates, we vet them, and then we negotiate a rate for the proposal, and we submit that to the members. There's a 7-day voting period, and at the end of that voting period, we know whether or not they have the money, and then they can start working. And after that, we follow up with them and make sure that everything's going according to plan. Trying to do this within the EF or consensus would take probably a lot longer. This was, like about a month. That would be maybe 3 to 6 months. And so it makes it completely unfeasible for grants of, in the like $30,000 dollar range in that area. It's not worth anybody's time to even bother going through the process. And it's like the death of curiosity when you don't have Google. Right, you're sitting there watching a movie, and you're like, what's that person's name again? But because you don't have Google, you're like, I guess I'll just keep watching, right? And so far, the ETH 2.0, Ethereum community, without having a sort of supply chain that they can tap into and receive grants, when they're like, I wish we had blah, that would be great. And, they can't be like, oh, let's do this. But now they're like, well, actually, what if we made a Moloch proposal for that? And so now there's this like new pathway that has emerged. And we're training the community members to be able to realize that they can parallelize and outsource parts of their roadmap. And I think that's going to move the whole ecosystem faster. Another cool thing is just on the great success category is that I think, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Moloch has more money in it than all of the other DAOs on Ethereum combined. Like all the Aragons are like 850,000, Moloch's at 1.3 million. I don't know how much, I don't think DAO Stack has that much money. It's like locked, it's staked, right? So like MakerDAO isn't really a DAO, it's a TCR. So Moloch will be reborn because it will die, but then it'll come back to life. There's no upgrade mechanism. I get this question a lot. They're like, how do you upgrade it? And we're like, we didn't even know if this was going to work. Why would we put an upgrade mechanism? Like, that takes time, introduces security vulnerabilities. Let's just ship the thing. If it works, here's a great upgrade mechanism. We can all rage quit, pull out our money, deploy a new contract, put our money in the new contract. It's going to be great. So in trying to design this new contract, the principles that I'm thinking about are, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But let's fix the broken things. So what's working as intended? The rage quit mechanism, totally working as intended. That has allowed people to join with confidence, and it also acts as a check on any abuse of power. Because the game theory of Moloch is, I don't want to vote in ways that will piss off anybody else enough that they will then quit. So I don't actually have any incentive to try and attempt to capture it. Now, this only works for DAOs which govern funds that can all be exited. It wouldn't work for something like block rewards. It wouldn't work for Polkadot, for example, because you can't leave with your share of Polkadot. Like, it doesn't work. But for this stuff, it does work, and I think it will continue to work. And having the post-vote grace period is really important for this because it allows you to see the outcome of a vote before you have to make the decision about whether or not to exit. Right? Otherwise, you would have to exit betting that the vote would go one way or another, just not as clean. Voting, no quorum and simple majority has been working fine. I was talking to the DAO Stack CTO yesterday. He's like, let's add holographic consensus to Moloch. I was like, why? Nobody's screaming right now that we need holographic consensus. Maybe if it balloons to 1,000 people, 10,000 people, then that would be a really important feature. But at the moment, I don't see a need for it. This has been working great. No quorum is actually also a DAO Stack recommendation to help it scale, because if you do get more members, then it's harder to get quorum. And also no quorum is, in the Moloch context, particularly safe because of the post-vote grace period where you can leave. Whereas in most governance structures, when a vote is complete, it's executed immediately. So permission entry, I also like. So permission entry, if you want to join Moloch either as to get a grant, or if you want to put money in, you have to be voted in through a proposal, same mechanism as by the existing members. And I think that's worked really well at curating who the members are and preventing members from joining that might try to mess with it or have their own interests and that are incongruent with the interest of everybody else. And keeping it simple, right? Trying to make sure that we don't do all the things, right? Because then it'll take too long, it'll never ship, it'll be really expensive. I still have my full-time job, so I have to just do this for fun. So things that are broken. Moloch is definitely broken in a bunch of ways that we now know about that might have been hard to predict earlier on. So one of the first things that's broken is multi-applicant proposals. Say I'm submitting a YangDAO proposal and I want to fund the different people who contributed to this effort individually and admit them all into the DAO. Well, I need to submit separate proposals for each of them that have each of them as the applicant. But these proposals can pass or fail independently, which is kind of bizarre. It would have been really funny, for example, if the development proposal passed and the design one failed, and be like, sorry, dude, let's try again, or But this can be solved with adding an array of applicants, for example, to a proposal, an array of shares to distribute to each applicant. There's volatility risk in the grants process. So Moloch uses only Ether, which has been a great decision, by the way, because we doubled our money because we started at $100 Ether. And people are like, why don't you use Compound? It's like, well, does your CDI double? No. It could also go down, though. And the problem is, for grantees, you take on 2 weeks of volatility risk because I price the proposal, time is over, but I price the proposal in the dollars at the time that the proposal is submitted. But you can fix this by adding the ability for the DAO to have multiple tokens. It can have ETH and maybe hold 10% of its assets in DAI, and then it uses the DAI as grant capital, and then it makes distributions of DAI, and at the end of that, it will, if it's starting to get low on DAI, it can buy more DAI with its ETH. But now you have a problem because now you have to be able to trade between the two of those. Another one is just a security issue where approving MolochDAO is unsafe. So if I approve my WETH to the DAO in order for a member to submit a proposal on my behalf, which I have to do, that member can be a douchebag, or another member can see that I've approved the contract and be a douchebag, and submit a proposal that takes all of my ETH that I have approved and gives me 0 shares. And so if the members decide to pass that proposal, I lose my money and get nothing. And that's not good. So we can solve that by allowing the applicants to confirm a proposal before it gets voted on. Vote delegation. So this is really funny. Didn't think this all the way through, but when the EF decided to join with 1,000 shares split between 10 members, they actually had to execute 41 transactions to do it. First, they had to wrap 1,000 Ether. Then they had to transfer a small amount of ETH to 10 addresses to pay for the gas. Then they had to transfer 100 WETH to 10 addresses. Then they had to go into each one of those addresses and call approve 10 times on the contract from each address. And then once the proposals had all passed, they had to go back into each of those 10 addresses and call update delegate key, which allows another address to vote on behalf of that address. And they did this because they wanted to centralize security, right? They wanted to have their DevOps team manage the 10 keys that can rage quit and take the money so that the people who are assigned voting rights don't need to worry about losing money, but they still wanted those members to be the ones who had control of voting power. And and this deals with like edge cases, like if they fire someone or for whatever reason somebody dies or something, like they can reassign that voting power to somebody else. And so you can solve this and have a function that's just update delegates, takes an array of addresses, array of votes to delegate, and they could have, instead of having 41 transactions could have had 2, or maybe 3. Because wrap the Ether, approve the ETH, and then once you're in, update all your delegate keys at the same time. Problem solved. Challenges with this are preventing double voting. If I delegate to somebody and then they vote, and then I delegate to somebody else, how do I make sure that I haven't voted twice on the same thing? And also, assigning votes to somebody who's assigned their votes to you would be really weird, because then we have a circular vote delegation. Fund safety. This actually happened to somebody where their car got broken into and they lost the member key that they had for their money, and now they can't rage quit. Now, fortunately, the money is still in the guild bank, which means whenever it comes time to wind it down, the remaining members can decide to make a proposal that gives themselves all of the shares, and that will give that person all of the money of the person who lost it, and they'll be able to get their money back, but they have to wait until the contract is done and they can't vote or anything. So one solution is to force contract wallets on people. Another solution is to add keepers who can rage quit on your behalf. Also a guild kick. So there's no way to kick anyone out, which means that it's harder to take a risk on somebody. If you think that somebody might be a liability, or you're not sure if they're fully aligned with you, you might want to just say, no, it's too risky to let you in because I can't decide differently later. But you could have a system to guild kick, force people to rage quit, essentially. So one is you submit a proposal to burn a member's shares, and that could work in a number of ways. One is that it's essentially you do the rage quit, but give them the money, which is what they would have done anyway. But if they lost their key, that doesn't really help. If you can also submit a proposal to burn their shares and send the funds to a different address, but that has the problem of I can just decide to give myself somebody's money. And the third one, which is that you decide to burn their shares and give the money to nobody, which means essentially they're distributed to the guild bank, to all the members proportionately, but then that basically becomes like a, look, we're gonna burn you if you don't leave yourself type of game. Not sure which of these to go with. Spam protection. So right now, with every proposal, it costs a deposit of 10 Ether. And so there is a 7-day voting period and a 7-day grace period, which means there can be 70 proposals active at a time, because there's also a throughput of 5 proposals per day. So 5 times 14, 70. So 70 times 10, 700, and that's about $130,000. So if you want to completely jam up the proposal queue, you could do it for $130,000. And the solution is to non-linearly increase for each member. ERC20, you can rebalance. I think they're telling me my time is over, so I'm going to wrap it up quickly. The simplest way to do this is to offer trades. There's other ways of doing this to custody funds, send it to some custodian, but then you have to trust that person. Really easy is just to be able to submit a proposal that has, I'm going to skip this one, has ERC20 tokens, and so proposals can offer any number of tokens, request any number of tokens, mint shares, or any combination of the above. And something that I think is interesting is that there's a lot of activity around building a for-profit DAO right now. And I'm pretty sure that the same contracts could be used for both a non-profit DAO that's an upgrade to Moloch and a for-profit DAO. And if either of these things interest you, come talk to me and let's jam. Also, like to announce the Moloch Pool, which is a way to donate proportional follow-on grants to Moloch without having to be vetted by the existing members. We launched this last week. You basically just go to the website, approve the tokens, and deposit into the Moloch Pool. And once you've done that, if Moloch does a grant for 1% of its money to some applicant, then the pool will also give 1% of its money to that applicant. Thank you all for your sacrifice.